The evening was quiet, the kind of evening when the streets seemed half asleep, and the air carried the smell of dust mixed with food from small vendors nearby. An elderly black man walked slowly down the street. His steps steady but tired, his back was slightly bent with age, and his hands clutched a small bag of groceries. It was nothing special. Just bread, some milk, and a few vegetables. But to him, it was important. He had saved carefully from his modest pension to buy it. He walked with dignity, even though his clothes were worn and his shoes had seen better days. People who knew him in the neighborhood respected him. He was a man of quiet strength. A man who had worked his entire life in factories and fields to raise his family. His face carried lines of struggle, but also lines of wisdom. He had never caused trouble, never broken the law. All he wanted was peace in the years left to him. But that night, fate had written a cruel twist into his path. As he turned a corner, the flashing lights of a police car lit up the street. The sudden sound of a siren made him flinch. The car stopped sharply in front of him, and 3 uniformed officers stepped out. Their boots hit the pavement with the sound of authority. The old man paused. Unsure why he had been stopped, he looked around. But there was no one else nearby. Only him. "Where are you going, old man?" One of the officers asked harshly. The man adjusted the bag in his hands and answered softly. "I'm just walking home, sir, from the store." His voice carried no threat, only tired honesty, but the officers looked at him with suspicion. Their eyes were cold, their posture aggressive. "Show us your ID," another barked. The man nodded and carefully reached into his pocket. His hands trembled slightly from age. But the officers mistook it for something else. "Why are you shaking? You hiding something?" One sneered. The old man quickly shook his head. "No, sir. Nothing. I have nothing." But suspicion turned to cruelty. One officer grabbed his arm roughly, almost making him drop the bag of groceries. The bread fell out and rolled onto the dirty ground. "Please," the old man said quietly. "That's my food." But his words were ignored. Another officer pushed him against the wall. The force too much for his fragile frame. Neighbors peeked from windows. A few pedestrians slowed down. Some even pulled out their phones, recording the scene from a distance. But no one dared to step forward. Fear of authority kept them frozen. The old man tried once more to explain. "I am not a criminal. I am just going home." But his calm words only seemed to fuel the officer's anger. One shoved him harder. Another struck him in the stomach. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the sidewalk. His groceries scattered across the ground, milk spilling. Vegetables rolling away into the gutter. A hush fell over the street as the beating began. The officers kicked him, punched him, their faces twisted with a sense of power. The old man groaned, but did not fight back. He raised his arms weakly, trying only to shield himself. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Please, stop. I've done nothing," but mercy was absent that night. Every blow was another humiliation. Every strike a reminder that to them, he was not a human being, but a target. A man whose age and color made him vulnerable. They beat him until his breath came in shallow gasps, until his vision blurred, and then they stepped back. Satisfied with their cruelty, one officer spat near him and muttered, "Stay down where you belong." They left him lying on the cold pavement, his body broken, his dignity torn. The police car drove away slowly, the flashing lights fading into the distance. The old man tried to move, but pain burned through every bone. He lay there under the streetlight, bleeding and trembling. His heart ached more than his wounds. It wasn't just the beating that crushed him, it was the shame. The way they had treated him as if his life had no value. People gathered slowly, but they kept their distance. Some whispered, some recorded, but none dared to help. The world seemed cruelly silent. His bag of groceries lay ruined beside him, a symbol of the simple life he had tried to hold on to. As his eyes fluttered shut, he whispered a name, his son's name. It was the only thought that gave him strength, somewhere out there. His boy, the one who had left to serve in the military. The one who had fought battles far from home was alive. The old man wished, just for a moment, that his son were here, that someone strong enough, brave enough, would stand beside him. The street grew darker, his body weaker, his breath came slow and shallow. Yet inside, a spark of hope refused to die. Because deep down, he believed in one thing: his son would come. His son would find him, and that belief, fragile but unbroken, was all that kept his eyes from closing forever on that cold, unforgiving street. The night deepened, and the street grew quieter, but the pain of the elderly man lying on the ground only grew heavier. His body ached with every breath, his ribs throbbed where the officer's boots had landed, and his face was swollen from their blows. His grocery bag lay torn beside him, the bread soaked in spilled milk, the vegetables scattered into the dust. To most people passing by, it looked like nothing more than trash on the sidewalk. But to him, it was the last bit of dignity he had carried home. He tried to move his hand, but even that felt like lifting a mountain. His fingers trembled as he reached for the broken loaf of bread, as though somehow holding it would remind him of normalcy. But his hand fell back to the ground, too weak. The cold pavement beneath him seemed to steal the warmth from his body, making him shiver. Even though the night wasn't that cold, people walked past, their eyes darting toward him, but quickly looking away. A few whispered, "Is he drunk?" Others muttered, "Don't get involved, it's the police." Some pulled out their phones to record, but stayed at a distance. Safe behind their screens, no one stepped forward, no one bent down. The man felt invisible. His pain was not enough to move them. His chest rose and fell with difficulty. His breaths shallow and uneven. He could taste blood in his mouth, metallic and bitter. He wanted to cry out for help, but his voice was barely more than a broken whisper. "Please, someone." The sound carried no power, swallowed by the night air as he lay there. His mind drifted back to memories of better times. He remembered holding his son's tiny hand as they walked through the same streets many years ago. His boy had always looked up at him with eyes full of trust. "Daddy, you're strong," the little voice had once said. But now, lying bruised and broken, he felt anything but strong. The humiliation hurt more than the pain. He had lived his whole life with quiet dignity, working long hours, paying his dues, raising his family with honesty, and yet, in just a few minutes, strangers in uniform had reduced him to nothing, left him bleeding on the ground like discarded trash. The weight of it pressed on his heart until it felt like he could barely breathe. A tear rolled down the corner of his eye, mingling with the dirt on the pavement. He thought of his wife, gone many years now. He wished she were here. Her presence had always been a comfort. He imagined her voice whispering, "Hold on. Don't give up." It gave him the faintest spark of strength. But it flickered weakly, like a dying flame. Cars passed slowly, headlights flashing across his battered body. Some drivers slowed down, staring, but then pressed on. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted to challenge the men in blue. The world had taught them to stay silent, and in that silence, he felt smaller, lonelier. He whispered again, but this time he said only one word: his son's name. It was faint, almost like a prayer. His boy had gone off to serve his country. Trained to fight wars in faraway lands, the father didn't know exactly where he was now. But he held on to one fragile belief. Somehow, his son would find out. Somehow, his son would come. The pain sharpened as he tried to shift his body. Every movement sent fire through his bones. He lay back down, defeated, his eyes blurred. and the world seemed to dim. He wondered if this was the end. If the last thing he would ever see was the streetlight above him and the shadows of strangers watching but not helping. But then, beneath the weight of despair, he felt a flicker of defiance. He whispered to himself, "I am not nothing. I am not trash." The words barely left his lips, but they mattered. They were his last attempt to hold on to the dignity the officers had tried to strip from him. Minutes passed like hours. The world continued around him. But inside, time felt frozen. The old man clung to one thought, that his son would come. He had raised that boy with his own hands, taught him respect, taught him courage, and now, lying helpless, the father placed all his hope on the strength of the son. The crowd shifted, more people whispering. Some shaking their heads, a few muttered that someone should call an ambulance. But no one moved. The helplessness cut deeper than the bruises. It wasn't just his body that was broken. It was the knowledge that people could see his suffering and still walk away. His breaths grew shallower, his body heavier. His eyelids fought to stay open. Darkness pressed at the edges of his vision. But just before he drifted into unconsciousness, his lips moved once more, quietly shaping the name of his son. That name carried him into the darkness, like a fragile lifeline holding him to the world. He didn't know it yet, but that whispered name, carried on the air of the night, would soon bring the storm. A storm that would shake the same street where he lay helpless. A storm in the form of a son who had fought wars, faced enemies, and survived battles, now coming home to fight for the one person he loved most. Far away from that broken street, in a quiet military base, a man was finishing his final debrief after a long mission. His name carried weight among his unit. But outside the base, he was simply a son who had been raised on values of respect, dignity, and courage. His body was strong, his eyes sharp, his stance confident. He had walked through deserts, crossed jungles, and faced dangers most men could not imagine. He had fought for his country, but more importantly, he had fought for people who couldn't defend themselves. As he left the room, his phone buzzed. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was another routine call. But the name flashing on the screen made his chest tighten. It was a neighbor from back home. He answered quickly, and the shaky voice on the other end delivered words that made his blood run cold. "Your father. He was beaten. The police. They left him on the street. He's hurt badly." For a moment, the soldier froze. The world around him seemed to blur. He felt his breath catch in his throat. His father, the man who had raised him with hard hands and gentle words, was lying helpless while strangers laughed. He could almost picture it. His father's worn clothes, his trembling hands, his quiet dignity crushed under the boots of men who were supposed to serve and protect. His fists clenched, his knuckles white. Memories flooded his mind. His father walking him to school, teaching him to tie his shoes, telling him to never bow his head to injustice. He remembered the promise he had made as a boy. "One day, I'll protect you the way you always protected me." That promise roared back to life in his chest like fire. He didn't waste a second. He grabbed his jacket, threw it over his uniform, and sprinted to his vehicle. His boots pounded against the ground with purpose. Each step carried the weight of his anger, his fear, and his determination. The engine roared to life as he sped down the road. Tires screeched, lights blurred past. His heart raced, but his mind was steady. He had been trained for war, for chaos, for life or death moments. And now that training focused on one mission: get to his father. As he drove, his thoughts cut like knives. He saw his father's face in his mind. He saw the man who had sacrificed everything so his son could grow strong. He saw the man who had bent his back under the son, who had taught him humility, who had told him again and again, "Son, never let anyone take your dignity away." And now that same man had been left broken on a street by those who wore the uniform of authority. His jaw tightened. He had faced enemies across the sea, but nothing filled him with rage like knowing his father had suffered at the hands of those who should have been protectors. The city lights grew closer, and with each passing mile, the soldier's resolve grew sharper. He thought of the neighbors who had called, who had whispered in fear. He thought of the crowd that must have stood watching. Silent as his father lay bleeding, the anger in him was not just for his father, but for the silence of everyone who had looked away. But he pushed those thoughts aside, right now. Only one thing mattered, his father. He pressed harder on the gas, the engine growling as if it shared his fury. He weaved through traffic, his eyes never leaving the road. Every second wasted was another second his father lay in pain. He couldn't allow that. Not when his blood still flowed with the lessons of the man who had raised him. Finally, as he turned onto the street where the incident had happened, he could already see the faint glow of lights. A small crowd had gathered, people whispering, pointing, recording with their phones, and at the center of it all, under the cruel glare of the streetlight, lay his father. The sight punched him harder than any battlefield ever had. His father's face was bruised, his clothes torn, his groceries scattered like broken pieces of dignity across the sidewalk. The soldier's hands trembled on the steering wheel. Not with fear, but with rage. He brought the vehicle to a sharp stop, the tires screeching against the pavement. The sound snapped every head toward him. The door flung open, and he stepped out. His boots hit the ground with a heavy thud. His frame stood tall, broad, commanding. The murmurs of the crowd quieted, their eyes widened. Sensing a storm had just arrived, the soldier's eyes locked on his father, and then on the officers still standing nearby, laughing, their arrogance dripping in every gesture. His jaw clenched, his chest heaved, and for a moment, silence ruled the street. He walked forward, each step slow, deliberate. Heavy with unspoken promise, people whispered, some stepping back instinctively. His presence was different. It wasn't just anger. It was power, discipline, and a dangerous calm born from years of training. As he approached, the officers turned, their smirks fading when they saw his eyes. Eyes that had stared into the face of war. Eyes that had seen brothers fall and enemies broken. They shifted uncomfortably, sensing something they could not explain. The son did not shout. He did not curse. He simply stood in front of them, towering. His voice low but sharp as a blade. "You hurt the wrong man," he said. His words slicing through the night. The crowd held its breath, and for the first time, the officers looked unsure of themselves. The battlefield had shifted, and the special ops son had arrived. The car door slammed behind him, and the sound echoed across the street like the start of a storm. The soldier stood tall, his shadow stretching under the harsh glow of the streetlight. The murmurs of the crowd fell into silence, and for a moment it felt as if even the air had stopped moving. Every eye turned toward him. Some whispered, "Who is that?" Others just stared, unable to look away from the way he carried himself. His shoulders broad, his jaw set, his steps firm and measured. He did not walk like an ordinary man. He moved like someone who had walked through fire and returned stronger. The soldier's eyes went straight to his father. The sight tore into him like a blade. His father lay broken on the pavement. Blood on his face, groceries scattered. Dignity shattered, the old man's chest rose weakly. His breath shallow, but his eyes still flickered open when he heard the footsteps approaching. And when he saw who it was, a faint glimmer of relief lit his face. "Son?" The word came out faint, trembling, but it carried more weight than all the noise around. The soldier dropped to one knee beside him. His large, battle-hardened hands touched his father's frail frame with surprising gentleness. "I'm here, Dad," he whispered, his voice steady but burning with anger just beneath the surface. "You're not alone anymore." The crowd leaned closer. their phones still raised, their eyes wide. They could sense something was different now. This wasn't just a man rushing to help his father. This was someone whose presence shifted the air, whose silence was louder than any shout. The police officers, still standing nearby, exchanged uneasy glances. Just moments ago, they had been laughing, boasting, throwing careless words. Now, they shifted their weight, their confidence cracking like thin glass. One of them muttered, "What's his deal?" But deep down, they already knew this man wasn't ordinary. The soldier rose slowly to his feet, his movements calm but heavy with unspoken promise. His gaze lifted from his father to the officers. His eyes were sharp, piercing. The kind of eyes that had seen death, war, and cruelty. The kind of eyes that carried no fear, only resolve. He took a step forward, and the crowd instinctively moved back. Making space, the officers stiffened, their smirks gone, replaced with something they hadn't felt in a long time: uncertainty. The soldier didn't rush, he didn't raise his voice. Every step he took was controlled, deliberate. Like a lion approaching its prey, the sound of his boots hitting the pavement echoed louder than the city noise. When he finally stood before them, the tension in the air was so thick you could almost touch it. The crowd held its breath. Even the night seemed to listen. The soldier's voice came low, calm, but it cut sharper than any blade. "Did you do this?" He gestured toward his father lying broken on the ground. The officers hesitated. One cleared his throat. He resisted, but the words died when the soldier's eyes locked onto him. Those weren't just angry eyes. They were the eyes of a man trained in battle. The eyes of someone who had faced down armed enemies and never blinked. In those eyes, the officers saw something they couldn't mock. Something they couldn't push aside: power, discipline, and a dangerous calm. The crowd began to whisper louder. Some said, "That's his son." Others gasped, "He looks like military." Phones zoomed in, recording every moment. Knowing something unforgettable was unfolding. The soldier's jaw tightened. He took one more step, and the officers instinctively leaned back. One of them tried to hide his unease with a smirk, but the mask was thin. The soldier pointed at the ground, his voice still steady. "My father is not trash. My father is not your punching bag. He is a man. And you treated him worse than an animal." His words echoed through the street, and the crowd erupted with murmurs of agreement. For too long, people had been silent, but now they had found a voice through him. The officer closest to him swallowed hard, trying to find words. "Listen, we were just doing our job." The soldier stepped closer. His face inches from the officer's, his voice dropped even lower. So calm, it was terrifying. "Your job is to protect, not to destroy. Your job is to honor, not to humiliate. You forgot that." The crowd gasped. Phones recorded. Their hearts raced. They knew they were witnessing more than an argument. They were witnessing the collision of arrogance and justice. The soldier turned slightly, raising his voice now so all could hear. His words rolled like thunder. "You thought he was alone. You thought no one would stand for him? But you were wrong, because his son is here now. And I do not walk away from battles." The officers shifted, their hands twitching nervously. Their pride was cracking, their power slipping. The soldier's presence had flipped the scene completely. Behind him, the elderly man lifted his head weakly. His lips trembled into a faint smile for the first time since the beating. He felt safe. He felt proud. His son had come. Just as he always believed he would. The night air was electric. The tension was unbearable. The crowd leaned in. Phones still raised, hearts pounding. Everyone knew something explosive was about to happen. And in that charged silence, one truth became clear. The soldier hadn't just arrived at the scene. He had arrived to turn the balance of power. And nothing would ever be the same again. The street was frozen in silence. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. The special ops son stood tall, his shadow falling over the officers who had moments ago laughed at his father's suffering. Now their smirks were gone, replaced with unease they could not hide. The soldier's eyes burned like fire, yet his body stayed calm. Every movement he made was controlled, precise. A man trained not just to fight, but to intimidate without even lifting a hand. He had faced warlords, armed enemies, and death itself. But this moment was more personal than any battlefield. This was not about a mission, it was about his father. He stepped closer to the nearest officer. The man tried to hold his ground. But his shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightened. The soldier's voice came low, steady, but every word cut through the air like a blade. You put your hands on my father. You beat him like he was nothing. You thought no one would come for him. But now I'm here. The officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He resisted. He muttered weakly. His words trembling under the soldier's gaze, resisted. The son repeated, his voice rising slightly. The crowd leaned in, recording every word. Resisted what? Buying groceries. Walking home. Breathing. The people watching erupted in murmurs. Some nodded, some whispered angrily. And the weight of the crowd's eyes pressed against the officers like chains. Another officer stepped forward, trying to sound confident. Back off. This is official police business. The soldier's lips curved into a cold, humorless smile. He took one more step until his face was only inches from the man's. His voice dropped so low, the officer flinched. I've stared into the eyes of men with guns pointed at my head. I've walked through fire while bullets cracked past me. You think your badge scares me? You think your lies can cover this? No, not today, the officer faltered, his bravado slipping. The crowd gasped. And phones tilted higher, capturing every detail. The soldier turned slightly, his voice booming now. Not just for the officers, but for everyone present. This man you left bleeding on the ground is my father. He worked his whole life for this country. He raised me with honor. He taught me never to back down from injustice. And you, he pointed at them, his finger sharp as steel. You tried to break him because of his age, because of his skin. Because you thought no one would stand for him, the crowd erupted, voices shouting, shame, and justice. The officers looked around nervously. Realizing the tide had turned, the soldier leaned down, helping his father sit up against his chest. His hands, so steady in combat, trembled slightly now as he held the fragile man. I've fought wars for this land, he said, his voice breaking but strong, and yet here at home. The man who gave me life is treated worse than an enemy. His father's eyes watered, his lips trembling. Son, don't. Don't risk yourself, he whispered weakly. But the soldier shook his head, his jaw firm. I risk myself every day, Dad. That's what I was trained for. And I'll risk everything for you. He stood again. Eyes blazing, the officers shifted uncomfortably. One reaching for his radio, but the crowd's eyes stopped him. They knew if he tried to twist the story, the truth was already captured by dozens of phones. The soldier pointed at them again, his voice thunderous now. You wear that uniform to protect, not to humiliate. You wear that badge to serve, not to abuse. Today, you showed the world what you really are. And now, the world will see the truth. The crowd cheered. Their voices louder, their courage rising from his words. For too long, they had watched in silence. But now they felt empowered. The soldier had given them a voice. One officer tried again. You don't know what you're dealing with, but the soldier cut him off with a glare that froze him in place. His voice dropped again, deadly calm. You're right. You don't know what you're dealing with either. I'm not just a son, I'm special ops. I've faced men far stronger, far smarter, far more dangerous than you'll ever be, and I won every time." The words sank deep. The officers stiffened, their pride shattered. The crowd gasped in shock, whispering, "Special Ops." "He's military." The phones kept recording, their lights blinking like silent witnesses. The soldier stepped even closer, his presence so heavy the officer stumbled back a little. "You thought my father was weak, but you never imagined who stood behind him. You thought you could break him, but you only woke the wrong man's son." The officers were silent now, their arrogance drained, their faces pale, their bodies tense. The soldier crouched back beside his father, gently lifting him with strong arms. His voice softened only for him. "You're safe now, Dad." "I've got you," the crowd applauded. Their voices loud, some chanted for justice. Others shouted words of encouragement. The street was no longer filled with fear, was filled with power. The confrontation was not fists against fists, but truth against lies, honor against arrogance. A father broken, a son unshaken, and in that moment, the cops realized that this fight was not theirs to win. The balance of power had shifted forever. Asterisk, the street buzzed with a strange electricity. The crowd pressed closer. Phones still lifted, recording every second. The officers shifted uneasily, their pride cracking under the weight of so many eyes. And standing tall in the center of it all was the Special Ops son. His father held gently against him. The soldier looked down at his father, brushing the dirt from his bruised face with surprising tenderness. His eyes burned, not only with anger, but with love. His voice softened as he spoke. "You will not be left alone again, Dad. Not while I'm here." Then he rose to his full height. And when he turned his gaze back to the officers, it was as though the air thickened. His presence was no longer just a son's anger, it was the authority of someone who had walked through fire and returned alive. "You want to know who I am?" he asked, his voice steady but loud enough to carry across the street. The officers didn't answer. They stood frozen, caught between fear and arrogance. The soldier straightened his back, his jaw hard, and spoke with a calmness that was more terrifying than a scream. "I am a soldier of this nation, Special Operations. I have spent years in war zones so people back home could live safe. I fought terrorists, criminals, and warlords. I've carried my brothers out of battlefields with bullets flying over my head. I've stared death in the face more times than I can count." Gasps swept through the crowd. People whispered frantically, "Special Ops. He's military." The glow of phone screens captured his every word, and some even went live. Broadcasting the truth to thousands beyond that street, the soldier stepped forward. His eyes locked on the men who had beaten his father. His voice grew sharper. "I have faced enemies who would kill without hesitation. And yet, standing here tonight, I see something worse than any battlefield. I see men in uniform, men sworn to protect, who used their power to crush the helpless." The officers flinched under his words. Their arrogance shrank into silence. Sweat ran down their faces. The soldier's tone dropped lower. Deadly calm, "You didn't just beat an old man. You beat my father, the man who raised me, the man whose hands built everything I stand on today. And you left him in the street like trash. You thought no one would come. But I came." His father's weak voice broke through the noise. "Son, please. Don't destroy yourself for me." But the soldier squeezed his shoulder gently and shook his head. "Dad, I've risked my life for strangers across the ocean. Do you think I'll hesitate to stand for you?" The crowd erupted in applause, cheers echoing against the buildings. Their voices grew bold. No longer whispers, but shouts of support. "Justice! Justice!" They cried. The officers looked around, realizing the balance of power had shifted. Their control of the street was gone, stolen by truth. One officer tried to speak, his voice trembling. You? You don't understand? We were just following the soldier, cut him off sharply. Following what? Orders to humiliate the innocent. Rules that tell you to treat my father as less than a man. Don't you dare hide behind your uniform. I know what it means to wear one. I've worn mine with blood and honor. And tonight, you have stained yours with shame. His words struck deep. The crowd cheered louder. People chanted his name. Though many didn't even know it, they only knew what he stood for: justice, dignity, family. The soldier raised his voice again. Now for everyone, let this be known. Respect is not optional. Dignity is not a gift you give or take away. Every man, every woman, every child deserves it. My father deserves it. And tonight, the world will see the truth of what you did here. The officers shrank further. They could see the red light of dozens of cameras pointed at them. Their cruelty captured forever. Their silence was louder than any excuse. The soldier turned slightly, his voice steady but final. My name doesn't matter. My rank doesn't matter. What matters is this: justice will be served. You cannot hide behind your badge. Not tonight. Not ever again. The old man, weak but proud, leaned against his son's chest. His eyes, swollen with pain, shone with tears. That's my boy, he whispered. His voice was fragile but filled with pride. The crowd roared in response, chanting louder, clapping, demanding accountability for the first time. The officers who had once felt untouchable now looked small, powerless, and exposed. The truth had been revealed, and it was heavier, louder, and stronger than any uniform or badge could ever be. The night air trembled with voices. The crowd that had once stood silent was now alive, chanting, clapping, calling out for justice for too long. They had watched men in uniform abuse their power, but tonight was different. Tonight, they had witnessed something greater than fear. They had seen courage stand tall in the form of a son protecting his father. The special ops soldier stood firm, his arm wrapped protectively around his elderly father. The bruises on the old man's face glistened under the streetlight. But in his eyes, there was something stronger than pain. There was pride. He leaned gently against his son's shoulder. Whispering, "You came for me," the soldier nodded. His voice low but steady. "Always, Dad." "You'll never be alone." He turned back toward the officers, who stood stiff, pale, their arrogance stripped away. Just moments ago, they had treated the old man like dirt. But now, under the glare of dozens of cameras and the weight of the soldier's presence, they looked like boys caught in a crime they could not excuse. The soldier's voice rose again, calm but thunderous. "Look at him," he said, pointing toward his father. "This man worked his whole life, paid his dues, raised me with honor, and you left him on the ground like he was nothing. But here is the truth. He is everything. He is the reason I am who I am. He is the reason I wear my uniform with pride. Without him, there is no me." The crowd erupted with cheers. Some people cried, others chanted louder. The soldier's words lit a fire in every heart. He stepped closer to the officers, his eyes hard. "You thought his weakness made him an easy target, but weakness is not what you saw. What you saw was age. What you saw was color. And what you showed was your own cowardice. Because real strength is not in hurting the helpless, real strength is in protecting them." The officers dropped their eyes. Unable to meet his gaze, their silence was an admission louder than any defense. The soldier turned again to the crowd, lifting his voice for all to hear. "Remember this night. Remember what you saw. No man, no woman, no elder should ever be humiliated for who they are. Dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. And when we stay silent in the face of cruelty, we become part of it. Tonight we speak. Tonight we stand. And tonight we show the world the truth." The crowd roared, chance of justice and respect. Rolling like thunder down the street, the fear that once kept them quiet had broken, replaced with a courage they didn't know they carried. The old man reached for his son's hand. His voice was weak, but his words were strong. "Son, you didn't just stand for me, you stood for all of us." His eyes scanned the crowd, and people nodded, some with tears streaming down their cheeks. The soldier squeezed his father's hand gently. "That's what you taught me, Dad. You said dignity is worth more than gold. And I'll make sure no one takes it from anyone else." A woman from the crowd shouted, "We saw it all. It's recorded. They can't hide it anymore." Phones lit the night, capturing the faces of the officers, the words of the soldier, the bruises on the old man. The truth was already beyond this street, was spreading. Unstoppable, the soldier faced the officers one last time. His words were final, sharp, and unforgettable. "Your badge does not protect you from truth. Tonight, the world will judge you, and unlike you, the world will not look away." The officers lowered their heads. Their power was gone, stripped not by weapons, but by the courage of one man standing for his father. The soldier gently lifted his father into his arms, carrying him the way a warrior carries his most precious mission. The old man's frail body rested against the chest of the son who had become his shield. The crowd parted, bowing their heads, giving way with respect. Some clapped softly. Others simply placed their hands over their hearts. As the soldier walked, his father whispered, his voice breaking but proud, "You kept your promise. You protected me." The soldier nodded. His eyes fierce but wet with tears he refused to let fall. "Always, Dad, always," behind them. The chants of the crowd grew louder. The officers stood frozen, the flashing lights of cameras burning their shame into the night. Justice had not yet been delivered in court, but it had already been delivered here, on the street where arrogance had been shattered by love. And as the father and son disappeared into the glow of the night, the lesson remained carved into every heart that had witnessed it. Respect is not earned by power or uniforms. It is owed to every soul, and the strongest people in the world are not those who take dignity away, but those who fight to protect it